After my sister's pregnancy, I also decided to conduct a paternity test for my child, which led to her divorce. I need to express my frustration because I feel like I'm on the verge of losing it. My sister, Jessica, 33, has always been the family's troublemaker, but she took things to a whole new level last weekend. For context, I'm a 35-year-old woman married to Tom, 38, for 15 years. We have 2 kids, Oliver, who is 5 months old, and Mia, who is 3 years old. Up until now, life had been relatively peaceful, but Jessica decided to turn my dad's 70th birthday into her personal circus. To give you a little backstory on Jessica, she's the type of person who can't stand not being the center of attention. If someone else is in the spotlight, she'll do whatever it takes to shift it back to her. Growing up, she was always the loud one, the dramatic one, the funny one, except her humor usually came at someone else's expense. Somehow, she's managed to carry that energy into adulthood. Dad's birthday was supposed to be a big happy celebration. My mom and I had been planning it for weeks, getting the food, decorations, and guest list just right. Jessica didn't help with a single thing. She didn't even RSVP until the night before. Typical. The day of the party started off great. We had a mix of family and close friends there, and everyone was in a good mood. Oliver, my little chatterbox, was running around telling anyone who would listen about his latest science project. He's obsessed with volcanoes right now and spent like an hour explaining how he made a lava explosion at school. Even Dad, who usually isn't one for long conversations with kids, was totally entertained. Then, just as Dad was starting his speech to thank everyone for coming, Jessica waltzed in an hour late. Instead of sneaking in quietly, she made a grand entrance, heels clicking, oversized sunglasses perched on her head, and a dramatic scarf that looked like it belonged at a fashion show, not a backyard party. The whole vibe shifted, people stopped what they were doing to look at her, and Dad paused mid-sentence. Instead of apologizing for being late, she laughed and said, "Sorry, I got caught up." You know how it is. No, Jessica, we don't. Once she was there, it felt like everything had to revolve around her. She started making comments about the decorations, cute, but a little basic, don't you think? Critiqued the food, this salad could use more seasoning, and even made a joke about the music being something from the Stone Age. But the real drama started during dinner. Everyone was sitting around the table enjoying the meal and chatting. Oliver, being his adorable self, continued telling everyone about this new book he was reading on dinosaurs. He was so animated and excited, and everyone was smiling and listening, everyone except Jessica, of course. She was rolling her eyes and looking at her phone, clearly annoyed that the attention wasn't on her. Then she dropped the comment that ruined everything. Jessica leaned over to her husband, Mark, and said in an exaggerated whisper, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "Isn't it fun how Oliver doesn't look like Tom? He kind of looks like Ryan, doesn't he? Ryan is my ex-boyfriend from college. We dated for a few years, but it ended ages ago. Tom knows about Ryan, of course, it's not some big secret. But for Jessica to bring him up like that in front of everyone was so calculated." The table went silent. Tom froze, his fork hovering mid-air. I could feel my face getting hot, and I blurted out, "What's that supposed to mean, Jessica?" She shrugged, all fake innocence. "Oh, nothing. I was just joking." But the damage was done. Tom didn't say a word, he just stared at his plate, his jaw tight. My dad awkwardly tried to change the subject, and everyone else started murmuring to each other. Jessica, meanwhile, looked thrilled. The rest of the dinner was a blur. I couldn't even taste my food because I was so angry. Every time I glanced at Tom, he was quiet, his face blank, but I could tell he was stewing. Jessica was laughing and chatting like nothing had happened. After dinner, I pulled her aside. "What is wrong with you?" I hissed. She looked at me like I was overreacting. "What?" "It was just a joke." "No, it wasn't," I snapped. "You know exactly what you were doing. Why would you say something like that in front of Tom, in front of everyone?" Jessica rolled her eyes. "Oh please, if it's not true, why are you so defensive? You're acting like I accused you of something you basically did," I shot back. "You just implied my son was driving me crazy." I knew the truth, I had nothing to hide, but Jessica's words had done their damage. She planted this ridiculous idea in Tom's head, and I couldn't figure out how to undo it. Later that day, after the kids went down for their naps, I finally brought it up. "So, are we going to talk about it?" I asked, trying to sound calm even though I felt anything but. Tom sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Talk about what?" he said, as if he didn't know exactly what I was talking about. "You know what Jessica's comment was," I said. "You've been acting weird ever since." He leaned back on the couch, avoiding eye contact. "I told you I trust you, Elise," he said after a long pause. "Do you?" I pressed, "because it doesn't feel like it. You've barely said 2 words to me since last night." He finally looked at me, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. "It's not that I don't trust you," he said, "but Jessica, she's always been sneaky. What if she knows something we don't?" That hit me like a slap in the face. "What are you even talking about?" I snapped. "Jessica doesn't know anything. She was just stirring up drama like she always does." Tom didn't respond right away. When he finally did, he said, "I just think if it's not true, then why not take a test and put this to rest?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I shouldn't have to prove anything to you," I said. "Oliver is your son, Tom. End of story. You either trust me or you don't." He didn't say anything, and that silence was louder than any argument we could have had. The rest of the day, we tried to keep things normal for the kids, but it was clear something was off. Oliver, being the observant little kid he is, even asked me at one point, "Mommy, are you mad at Daddy?" I told him I wasn't, but the truth was I was furious. By the end of the weekend, the tension was unbearable. Tom was still stuck in his head, and I hated it. Our marriage had always been solid, but Jessica's comment had shaken something loose, and I didn't know how to fix it. The worst part was I couldn't stop thinking about it either, not because I believed there was any truth to what Jessica said, but because it felt so unfair. I hadn't done anything wrong, and yet here I was, stuck in this mess she created. It didn't help that Tom started acting distant. He wasn't outright accusing me of anything, but there was this weird tension between us that wouldn't go away. Every time we had a minor disagreement about what to make for dinner or whether Oliver should watch another episode of his favorite show, it felt like there was this unspoken thing hanging over us. Then there was Jessica. She hadn't reached out since the party, which wasn't surprising. She probably thought she'd done her job and could sit back and watch the chaos unfold. That's the thing about Jessica, she loves to stir the pot but never sticks around to deal with the aftermath. My mom, on the other hand, called me the day after the party to check in. She noticed that we left early and wanted to make sure everything was okay. "We're fine," I lied, "just tired." Mom paused, like she didn't quite believe me. "You know Jessica didn't mean anything by it, right?" she said. I almost laughed. "She didn't mean anything by it, Mom?" She basically implied that Oliver isn't Tom's kid in front of the entire family. Mom said she was just joking. "You know how Jessica is, she doesn't think before she speaks." "That's not an excuse," I said. She knew exactly what she was doing. "Well," Mom said after another long pause, "you know how she gets. She probably just felt left out. Everyone was doting on Oliver, and she probably wanted some attention." I didn't have the energy to argue with her, so I just said, "Yeah, maybe," and ended the call. But inside, I was seething. Jessica didn't feel left out, she wasn't some innocent kid acting out for attention. She was a grown woman who deliberately tried to mess with my family, and she succeeded. The days that followed were tough. I wasn't fighting outright, but there was this undercurrent of tension in everything we did. Every time I looked at Tom, I could tell he was still thinking about Jessica's comment, even if he wouldn't admit it. By the end of the week, I was at my breaking point. Something had to give, but I didn't know what. All I knew was that Jessica had all started with something trivial, like what to eat for dinner, but it quickly spiraled into something much bigger. "I don't know how much longer I can live like this," I said finally, throwing up my hands in frustration. "What do you want me to do?" Tom asked, his voice rising for the first time. "Just pretend Jessica never said anything. Pretend those doubts aren't there. Yes. I shouted. That's exactly what I want you to do because those doubts are ridiculous, and they're hurting our family. Tom shook his head. You keep saying they're ridiculous, but if that's true, why not take the test? If it's all nonsense, what's the harm in proving it? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The harm, Tom, is that you're making me prove something I shouldn't have to prove. Do you not understand how humiliating that is? How insulting. He didn't answer, just looked at me with that same conflicted expression I'd been seeing for days. That's when I realized he wasn't going to let this go. No matter how much I argued, no matter how many times I told him he was wrong, he wouldn't be satisfied until he had proof. The next morning, I made a decision. It wasn't about Tom anymore, it was about Oliver. I couldn't let this tension fester any longer, especially since it was starting to affect our kids. If taking the stupid test would bring peace back to our home, then fine, I'd do it. When I told Tom, he seemed relieved, which honestly hurt more than anything. He didn't apologize or say he'd changed his mind, he just nodded and said, I think it's for the best. For the best? Yeah, sure. The process itself was straightforward. We went to a clinic where they swabbed Oliver's cheek, then Tom's, then mine. Oliver thought it was some kind of fun science experiment, which made me feel even worse. He had no idea what was really going on, and I prayed he'd never find out. The wait for the results was excruciating. It was only a few days, but it felt like an eternity. Every time I looked at Tom, I felt this wave of anger and sadness. How did we get here? How did my marriage, my family, come to this point? When the results finally came in, I was the one who opened the envelope. Tom sat across from me, looking tense while I unfolded the paper with shaking hands. And there it was, in black and white, a 99.9% match. Oliver was Tom's son, just like I'd always known. I handed the paper to Tom without a word. He read it, then looked up at me, his face full of guilt. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Sorry? I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. You're sorry? I shouldn't have doubted you, he said. I let Jessica get in my head, and I shouldn't have. I wanted to yell at him, to tell him exactly how much he hurt me, but I couldn't. I was too tired. The fight had drained me completely, and all I could do was sit there in silence. Over the next few days, Tom tried to make it up to me. He apologized over and over again, saying he'd never let Jessica's words get to him again. But the damage was done. I couldn't look at him the same way, not yet. Meanwhile, my mom called to check in, and I told her about the test. Well, at least now Tom knows the truth, she responded. The truth? I snapped. The truth hasn't changed, Mom. It was always the truth. The test didn't prove anything I didn't already know. Mom tried to backpedal, but it didn't matter. She didn't get it. No one did, except maybe me. Jessica had done what she set out to do, she planted doubt in Tom's mind, and that doubt had nearly torn us apart. And Jessica? She still hadn't reached out, not a single call, not a single text, nothing. I thought about confronting her, about telling her exactly how much damage she caused, but what was the point? Jessica doesn't care about anyone but herself. She'd probably just laugh it off and say it was just a joke. But it wasn't a joke, not to me and not to Tom. I was still stewing over everything that happened with the paternity test when I decided I couldn't just let Jessica walk away from this unscathed. She'd almost destroyed my marriage and our family's peace with her disgusting joke, and the fact that she hadn't even reached out to apologize made it clear she didn't care. So I did what any reasonable, slightly petty person would do. Rachel was actively commenting in these groups, giving advice like, always have a backup story, ladies, and use a different name on dating apps. Trust me, it works. It was sickening. She was out here wrecking her own marriage while nearly destroying mine, and she acted like it was some kind of game. But wait, it gets worse. As I kept scrolling through her Facebook activity, I noticed a name that kept popping up, Brandon. He wasn't in her friend list, but he was in the same groups, and they were interacting a lot. I decided to dig deeper, and sure enough, Rachel was messaging Brandon privately. Rachel wasn't just cheating online, she had an OnlyFans account. I couldn't believe it when I first found it. At first, I thought, this can't be Rachel. There's no way. But as I scrolled through her content, there was no denying it. It was her face, her voice, her everything. She was using a fake name, but it didn't take much detective work to connect the dots. Rachel wasn't just posting risque photos, she was doing full-on explicit content and charging people for private messages and custom videos. And guess who her biggest fan was? Brandon. I was floored. This woman had been pretending to be the perfect wife, stirring up drama in my life and accusing me of infidelity while running a double life as some kind of OnlyFans star. At this point, I wasn't even sure what to do with all this information. Part of me wanted to send it all to Jake right away, but another part of me hesitated. I didn't want to destroy his world without being sure of my next move. Things got even messier when Rachel announced she was pregnant. She made a big deal about it on Instagram, posting a picture of her ultrasound with the caption, "Our little blessing is on the way." The timing couldn't have been worse. For one thing, Rachel and Jake had been trying for a baby for years with no luck. She used to complain about it all the time, saying it was unfair how easily other people got pregnant while she couldn't. So when she finally announced she was expecting, everyone was thrilled except me, because I knew the truth. I'd seen her messages to Brandon. I'd seen the videos, the photos, the comments. I knew Rachel was lying to everyone, pretending this baby was Jake's when there was a very real chance it wasn't. I decided to gather more evidence before making a move. I joined the infidelity groups under my fake account and started interacting with Rachel and Brandon. I pretended to be someone else entirely, asking for advice on how to handle an affair. Rachel was more than happy to help, of course, giving me all kinds of tips on how to avoid getting caught. Through these conversations, I learned even more about her relationship with Brandon. They'd met through OnlyFans, but it had quickly turned into something more. She'd been meeting him in person for months, sneaking off whenever Jake was out of town or busy with work. One message from Brandon stuck out to me: "I can't wait to meet our baby. I hope she looks like you." I felt sick. Rachel wasn't just lying to Jake, she was setting him up to raise a child that wasn't even his, and she was doing it without a shred of guilt. At this point, I knew I had to confront her. She had gone too far, and there was no way I could sit back and let her get away with it. But I also wanted to do it in a way that would make her squirm. She deserved to feel even a fraction of the humiliation she caused me. So I started planning. When my mom told me she was throwing Rachel a gender reveal party, I almost choked on my coffee. A party for Rachel? After all the crap she pulled felt like a slap in the face. But my mom, being my mom, was all about keeping the peace and treating everyone equally. "Elise," she said in her usual calming tone, "we threw a party for you when you were pregnant with Oliver. It's only fair we do the same for Rachel." Fair? I scoffed. "Mom, this isn't about fairness. She's a liar and a troublemaker, and you're rewarding her with a party." Mom sighed. "I know Rachel has her flaws, but she's family. And now that she's pregnant, maybe this will soften her. Help her grow up a little." I wanted to scream, "Mom, she's literally living a double life." But I didn't. At that point, I wasn't ready to reveal what I knew not yet. Instead, I bit my tongue and said, "Fine, have your party, but don't expect me to pretend everything's okay." "Can you at least come?" Mom asked, sounding tired. I thought about it. On one hand, I didn't want to be anywhere near Rachel. Soaking up their compliments, I walked over to Rachel and said loudly enough for the group to hear, "So, Rachel, have you told Jake about Brandon yet?" The conversation stopped. Rachel froze, her smile faltering for the first time all day. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice tight. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I replied, crossing my arms. "Brandon, the guy you've been chatting with on Facebook, the guy who's been paying for your OnlyFans content, the guy who might actually be the father of your baby." The color drained from Rachel's face. "You're insane," she snapped. "You're making this up." "Am I?" I said, pulling out my phone. I'd saved screenshots of her messages with Brandon, her OnlyFans account, and even some of the more incriminating comments she'd left in those cheating groups. I handed my phone to Jake and said, "Take a look." Jake hesitated for a moment, then took the phone. As he scrolled through the screenshots, his expression changed from confusion to shock to anger. "Rachel," he said finally, his voice low, "what the hell is this?" Rachel started stammering, her hands fluttering like she was trying to grab the words out of the air. It's not what it looks like," she said. "It looks like you've been lying to me," Jake said, his voice rising. "It looks like you've been cheating on me." By now, the entire party had gone silent. Everyone was watching, their faces a mix of curiosity and horror. Rachel, clearly panicking, turned on me. "You're such a jealous bee asterisk 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 asterisk," she spat. "You've been obsessed with ruining my life ever since the paternity test." I didn't flinch. "No, Rachel, you ruined your own life. I just exposed the truth." Jake threw the phone onto the nearest table, his face red with anger. "Is the baby even mine?" he demanded. "Of course she's yours," Rachel shouted, tears streaming down her face. "I would never." "Then take a paternity test," Jake interrupted. "Prove it." Rachel's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She looked around the room as if hoping someone would come to her rescue, but no one did, not even our mom, who stood frozen in the corner with her hand over her mouth. "I don't need to prove anything to you," Rachel said finally, her voice shaking. Jake let out a bitter laugh. "That's what I thought." He turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Rachel collapsed onto a chair, sobbing, while the rest of us stood there in stunned silence. I expected my mom to start lecturing me about how I shouldn't have done this at the party, but she didn't. She just stared at Rachel, her expression a mix of disappointment and disbelief. After a few minutes, Nate walked over to me and said quietly, "Maybe we should go." "Yeah," I said, my voice steady. "I think we're done here." As we left, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, I felt like the weight on my shoulders had lifted. Rachel had spent her whole life tearing people down, but this time she had torn herself down. After the gender reveal party, things spiraled for Rachel faster than even I could have predicted. Jake left her that night and didn't come back. Apparently, he wanted to stay with a friend, and when my mom called to check on him, he told her he wouldn't be stepping foot in that house until Rachel took a paternity test. Rachel, true to form, refused. She dug her heels in and played the victim, acting like Jake was the bad guy for even asking. "How dare he doubt me," she told my mom over the phone, sobbing loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. But her refusal only made things worse. Jake wasn't an idiot, he'd seen the screenshots, read the messages. He knew there was more to the story than Rachel was letting on, and honestly, so did everyone else. My parents were devastated. They'd always tried to see the best in Rachel, no matter how awful she acted, but this was a new low. My dad, who usually stayed out of family drama, sat her down one evening and said, "Rachel, if you don't take the test, you're going to lose your husband." "Is that what you want?" Her response? "Maybe I don't want him anymore." That shut my dad up real quick. He didn't know what to say to that, and honestly, neither did anyone else. Meanwhile, Rachel was still living her double life, but cracks were starting to show.